The unrest in Egypt is entering its second week. Protesters filled the streets across the country for a seventh straight day Monday. Meanwhile, despite the widespread calls for his ouster, President Hosni Mubarak is showing no sign of stepping down. Meanwhile, the Obama administration is walking a fine line on whether Mubarak should remain in power.
I'm not speculating about, who goes or who stays, and I'm not, prepared to comment on what kind of democratic process the Egyptian people can construct for themselves.
That is not for our government to determine. That is for the people of Egypt to determine. So I have not weighed in on anything other than as we have throughout this process, on the side of the people of Egypt to determine what Egypt looks like in their future.
The turmoil in Egypt is providing President Obama with one of his toughest foreign policy challenges yet. And joining us now from Washington is Laura Rosen, foreign affairs reporter for Politico. Thanks for being with us, Laura.
Thanks for having me.
All right, first off, a lot of people want to know, why won't the administration come out and call on Mubarak to step down?
I think the administration is struggling with some conflicting principles or whatever here. On the one hand, they've articulated that they, are urging the regime not to use violence against the protesters, and I think successfully to some degree. The Egyptian police and military have shown some restraint. Today, you saw the Egyptian military issued a formal statement saying that they would not attack the Egyptian people. At the same time, I think, as Gibbs said in your run-up, the administration doesn't feel like it should impose its solution on the Egyptian people, that it sort of wants the Egyptian people to sort out what their future is going to be. So, I know some people were at the White House today, Egypt experts talking with them about the different options, and they said it was their impression that the administration was considering the option of perhaps at some point privately telling Mubarak it's time to go, but they didn't think that the administration was there yet.
All right, let's talk about options a little bit more. Is there any way that you can see Mubarak staying in power?
Honestly, even today, the Mubarak confidant, the Egyptian intelligence official who was recently appointed the vice president, Omar Suleiman, went on Egyptian television and said Mubarak had authorized him to open up a dialogue with the opposition and start implementing reforms and legislation. Some analysts said this was the Egyptian military apparatus easing Mubarak out and easing towards a transition, towards some sort of way to get towards new presidential elections. Others saw it as a ploy for the regime to peel some protesters off and try to buy time for the regime. So it's unclear. I do think that even the Obama administration, the language you're hearing is talking about a transition to something that will inherently be post-Mubarak.
All right, but what can happen if the U.S. does sort of get involved, per se, in the coming days to ensure a moderate democratic government takes hold? Is that something that it could possibly do, and do you foresee that happening?
I've been hearing today that there are more signs of and evidence of Egyptians sorting out channels for having this kind of negotiation, and certainly the United States will try to use its leverage to make sure that it's not the worst outcome for the United States and for its values. But I think they're really looking for the Egyptians to take the lead. I heard today that several Egyptian opposition parties have formed an opposition steering committee, and they've actually been able to meet frequently the past few days because there are so few police left on the streets. So, you see the Egyptian opposition with, and there's been a lot of civil society there, which has been able to organize more. And you see signs that people from the Egyptian government are recognizing that they have to negotiate with them. So I think the administration is probably going to let the Egyptians take the lead.
All right, let's look big picture here. Egypt has a very close diplomatic tie with Israel. Do you get a sense that those relations could be strained because of all of this?
Yes, and that's another thing influencing the United States for sure, is they're hearing from lots of allies, particularly Israel and other moderate Arab regimes, that they're very nervous about the perception that the U.S. is kind of stabbing Mubarak in the back. Although that's not the perception in Washington, that is the perception, is that Obama's not acted forcefully to keep Mubarak there. So the Israelis are very nervous that there could be an Islamist regime that eventually, an Islamist takeover that eventually happens in a power vacuum in Egypt. Most analysts in Washington think that's not likely in the near term and believe that Egypt has a pretty sophisticated population and chance for a more pluralistic government that wouldn't become, radicalized.
All right, Laura Rosen from Politico, we always appreciate your insight. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.